Hello and welcome to Lightmap from SIFTER. On Lightmap, we explore what it takes to make video games and interactive media from creative teams all around the world. It's a guide to those new interesting gameplay experiences, and we pull back the curtain a little bit about what it actually takes to put together these projects that we love and we enjoy. We speak to developers, artists, musicians, researchers, and more. My name is Gianni di Giovanni. I'm proud to welcome you to an episode of Lightmap. And on this episode, we're joined by Ed Orman, who's from Uppercut Games, who's joined us previously on the podcast when we spoke about City of Brass a number of years ago now. It doesn't feel like that long ago, but it's been a little while. Ed, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Yes, it has been a while. But then again, the last 2 years feel like about 10. So everybody's used to that kind of compressed feeling.
Definitely. We're talking today about a new game that's coming out. It's an interesting one because it's been out for a while, but people in Australia haven't been able to play it at all. We're talking about Submerged Hidden Depths. So let's jump right in. Leave a little gap here for a promo. Okay, Ed, now if people haven't come across Submerged Hidden Depths, which for a lot of people in Australia that would be understandable because it initially launched on a system that wasn't available here, can you tell us a little bit about the game? What is it and how do you play?
So Submerged Hidden Depths is the sequel to our game from 2015 called Submerged, which was available on all the platforms and still is. But Google approached us when they were starting up their Stadia thing and said, look, we really love this game. We think it's a great match for our service, so can you make a sequel? And the reason they liked it for what they were doing is that the basics of this game is it's a relaxing exploration game. There's no combat. The goal is for you to just be able to get in, exist in this really beautiful kind of like peaceful world, boat around, do some light puzzle solving, but really do everything at your own pace. And it was kind of meant to be an antidote for, there was a lot of games, and I love combat games and I love action games, but this is supposed to be the opposite of that. This is just do things the way you want to do them and take your time. And that was Submerged, and Submerged Hidden Depths is really us kind of doubling down on that and giving you more to do in this space. And it's a much more beautiful place, I think, compared to the first game. And so, that was our goal, was just create continue that story, but create a really nice, relaxing place for people to boat around in and just explore.
The world itself, it inherently feels dangerous. Why did you want to make a non-combat game in a game which would be, I imagine, pretty tricky to survive in?
There's value, I think, in having there's tension and release. And even though I think horror games probably do this a lot more strongly, right? Like they'll have really big, in terms of like the tension, like really high peaks, and then they'll drop that off. Like we still wanted to have some of that. So there is, I understand what you're saying. Like the world of Submerged is a ruined city that is just sticking up out of the ocean, and you're boating around this place, and there are, there's some strange creatures there, and there's this hideous black plant growth that is growing over everything. So there is that little bit of, tension and fear underneath the surface there. But really, we still do those little spikes. As the more you learn, the more you understand what it is that's going on, and you actually become empowered to sort of affect that and control that over the course of the game. So we still want to have a little bit of that. It's a childhood thing, I think. Like we like to have little scares that are safe scares, and so Submerged has an element of that in it. Yeah.
What was it like to return to the series? Was it always intended that you would make a sequel, or was it more that Google kind of came to you and said, "Here, have a go and see what you can make"?
That's a really good question. My recollection is, I know it feels like it's not that long ago because the game's only just coming out, but because it did come out, or we started development on it a while ago, we had always known that it was possible to do a sequel there. And the first Submerged was probably one of our most successful games in terms of sales and revenue. So we really liked that universe. But for it to be successful, it has taken multiple years. Right? When it first came out, it did okay, but nothing amazing. But then the following year, it actually picked up, and then every year after, it's sort of done better and better, and it's had a very long sort of tail on it, if you like. So we always knew it was a potential, but we also knew that we wanted to do it justice and do it way better if we could, because the original Submerged was quite a small team. I'm trying to think. It might have even been like 8 people, maybe even less than that. I can't quite remember. But the one with Google Stadia's backing, we had a team of like 23 people at the max, plus external contractors and things, so we could put way more effort into the art. The world, I think, is just way more beautiful. The sound design had much more time spent on it, so it's a much better version of that game, as well as being a continuation of the series.
What are some of the considerations you had to have when you were designing a game initially to be run over the internet? It's Stadia, for people who may not be familiar, is a streaming service. It's like a cloud-based, browser-based, or you can play it on apps as well, service where you're playing remotely. How does that work when you're trying to think about latency and all of these things and designing a game that makes sense for that platform?
So the best thing to say about Stadia is that they solve that problem for you. Their whole goal, the way that their technology works, is to remove latency. Not to say that it's perfect, and probably if you have a very twitchy game, maybe it's got some issues that you can see. But in a game that is slowly paced, and relaxing and stuff, you cannot tell the latency is there. I don't know how much you know about the Stadia technology, but the controller that comes with it connects to the internet itself. It doesn't connect to your computer and then onto the internet. And they do that to remove latency, so it's directly speaking to the servers, not your computer and then on. So it's really clever technology. It is a shame that it obviously didn't get released in Australia. That was quite frustrating. But it's really good tech. But it's also, I think, credit to the Stadia people that they came to us after it was a Stadia exclusive and said, "Hey, would you like to also release this on other platforms?" And we were like, totally, this is a sequel to one of our best games, and there's a demand out there. People keep asking us when can it come. So good on them for letting us to bring it out to all these other platforms.
What are some of the changes that had to be made, or was it a relatively straightforward process to bring it to a number of platforms? Because it will be coming out on a lot of different things in a very short time. Moving this from where it was originally into something on a home console or on a PC.
I won't get into the fully technical details because I am not the programmer, I'm a designer. But I can tell you for Stadia, right, we had to run that game at 60 frames per second at 4K. So we did an awful lot of optimization work just to make that happen, because that's their goal, is everything has to be 4K, 60 frames per second. So it was already running pretty well. You do then have to bring it to the consoles, and it is coming out on PlayStation 4 and 5. And the big difference there is the hard drive. Obviously, the 5 has a solid-state hard drive, which means that things load much faster, which is a lot closer to the Stadia experience. So it was, I would say, it was easier to get it onto the PS5 than the 4, but it was still, there was still a bunch of work there just to make sure that it's mostly about streaming and making sure that the game is loading into memory as quickly as possible. Control-wise, all of that sort of stuff, it was very, very straightforward. Mostly just making sure it runs at a good frame rate and still looks as good as it can, and then dealing with the peculiarities of each platform and their achievement systems and all that sort of stuff.
Speaking of the design of the world, it feels relatively open-ended, and I'm wondering, what are the considerations you give to players to sort of pull them along, take them in directions, or give them the opportunity to kind of head in whatever direction they want. Can you tell me a little bit about how you sort of balanced not having, limitless options, but also enough to keep people moving through?
Yeah, we really make our own lives hard. Open world games in general, I think, are difficult for exactly those reasons for guiding players. We, in particular, made it difficult for ourselves because, there's no barriers or walls in this world because it's an ocean. You can basically, from the outset, when you get back into the boat, you can go wherever you want. We don't stop you from going anywhere. So that is difficult. We have to, the scripting and everything in the game has to handle, well, what if the player goes to here? So there's no sequence that we can rely on. So we have to build the story so that it is revealed, regardless of what order you do things, you're still getting the story in the order that we think will make sense to the player. In terms of signposting, like once you've built this huge place, we still, even having made the first game, we learned a lot in the second one about making sure the players knew where they could and could not go, what buildings it was that they could actually travel to and climb, and how to get to those buildings. Because at water level, you've got a giant set of skyscrapers around, and at water level, that is a maze. It's very difficult for a player to innately understand, well, how can I get to that tall building that I can see? Like, they might potter around and get there eventually, but you still want to help them a bit. So we added signposting in some place, literal floating signposts that help, because the world in the second game has been inhabited by post the apocalypse, let's call it, when the oceans rose and everybody was destroyed by the mass that exists in this world, which is the thing that kind of rose up out of the oceans and killed everybody. But there were survivors, and they actually built all of their villages on these buildings. So that gave us lots of opportunities for now saying, okay, well, those people, they decorated the buildings the way that they wanted them to be, and they added signposts for different clusters of villages to visit one another. So those levels of signposting felt very natural, and they were easily part of the world. And on top of that, then you have just full-on game UI help. Sometimes you just need to give the player a little bit of help. So when they use a telescope and they discover a place that they could go, we mark that on their map, and you can mark that in the player's view. But yeah, other than that, we try and stay hands-off. You go and discover things. We will indicate to you as clearly as we can what things it is that you can go and interact with, and then it's just up to you.
I'm curious about the considerations about designing this world, because there is obviously a lot there that people in our world can recognize, right? We're starting to see things that we get the general gist of what it is, landmarks that we're familiar with, and part of exploring this is understanding how these have changed after this big cataclysmic event. But I'm wondering, were there certain things that you had to think about when you're designing the game to include or not include because of the way that we already have our expectations in the real world on? Don't go to this particular area because we would know that area is dangerous in the real world, so we probably wouldn't go there, or anything like that.
I mean, the lowest level example I can think of that is doors. Actually, like old doors don't have handles in our game. Because we don't use any of them. You're not supposed to be able to go through any of them. But the first version of those that we had door handles on them, and of course that's a signal to players, hey, that's a door that I can open. So we had to take all the door handles off. That's I know it's not quite what you're saying, but yeah, there are affordances that people are used to from games and from real life that you have to, kind of strip out and make sure that they understand, this isn't a thing that you can interact with. Because there's no danger in the game, we don't have to signpost anything where it's well, you can't go here. Basically, you can go wherever you want.
Can you tell me a bit about how you sort of frame this story? Because it unfolds, it's delivered in a language that we don't understand. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is a real language, but it's not something I understand. But, it's subtitled and things like that. And tell me a bit about how you sort of touched on it before, but how people can unfold this story as they go through the game and sort of keep it in a cohesive way so that when they come out at the end, they've had an experience of story being told to them.
We like... it's a 3-tiered story, if you like. There is, and we tell it in parts, and those parts are delivered to the player in different ways. So there's the story of now, what is going on right now. These kids have arrived in this city, and what is it that they're now going to do and learn while they're in this city about this place? But there is their preceding story, how did they get to this point, which includes the events of the first game, but then everything in between the first game and this one is also part of the story that's unlocked. And then there is the story of the city itself, what happened to this city. How did all these villagers build this place, and then why did they all disappear? And each of those stories is delivered in a different way. We obviously have the cutscenes in the game, which are presented in beautiful 3D, and you see the actions of the players in those and the things that they learn. You'll also see the background story we reveal mostly in diaries that are found across the world. And like the first game, those are presented in a pictographic way. It's a set of pictures that you're supposed to not directly understand, but you should be able to nut out roughly what the actions are that are going on. And the kid's backstory is similarly, Miku still has her dreams, and those dreams bring up a little bit of the past. So as the game progresses, you find out what happened to bring them to here. And they all sort of arrive at the same time to a point near the end of the game. You sort of get the full idea of what everything that happened to each of those different threads. It's fun to tell stories that way, trying to and make sure that they all tie into one another and they all deliver a great payoff at the same point. It's tricky, but it's fun.
The post-apocalypse is kind of a pretty strong theme for video games. And I'm wondering, were there any parts that you drew inspiration from other genres or other media, or anything that you thought, no, we definitely don't want to do in our game, other than the non-combat of the world?
Yeah, not Waterworld. Weirdly enough, when we even made the first game, it didn't occur to us for ages that Waterworld was, a movie that existed about an apocalypse, set on the ocean. But I've always been, in my juvenile way, like a big fan of the post-apocalypse. I understand the appeal. I think of, wiping the slate clean and building on, what's left behind. I think that's a very attractive prospect to a lot of people as a fantasy. So yeah, I like there's heaps of inspiration, like from Mad Max through to the new Mad Maxes, Boy and His Dog, like all of those ideas of the road as well, which is a far more grim tale than ours. But the idea of the solitary traveler who is discovering, what happened to this world. That theme is, all the way through post-apocalyptic fiction, I think, and media. So yeah, we take inspiration from that, but I feel like we've done a pretty good job, I think, of establishing our own sort of universe here, and there is, there's a full backstory about why this happened to the world, and there's a lot of political undercurrent in Submerged 1 was made at a time, which is still a problem, where climate change was just still not being recognized by people, and that was frustrating. And, it's a pretty, I think it's pretty obvious the message that we have on that front there. But yeah, lots of post-apocalyptic stuff has its uses in being inspirational, I guess.
How do you keep it not a grim, a hopeful world or a positive world without it being, too grim? Because, there really, you see the remnants of a lot of people in this game, of animals and things like that. And it's not difficult to see the tragedy of what has happened.
Yeah, I agree. It's a fine balance for us. One of the things we always strive to do is make sure that the place is beautiful, so that even though bad things have happened, we understand that. And you do find out, some of those bad things that have happened to people in particular, and to the animals as well. The end result is still that the world is capable of healing itself in some way, and that beauty still exists in this place. Miku and Taku both get to see, how the world is sort of rebuilding itself. Maybe it's not the world that humans had before, but it is still a place that, is thriving with life and beauty. So we always, I've worked on plenty of grim, dark games, especially post-apocalyptic games. I've worked on Fallout Tactics and even our own Epoch game, and that was just straight out like, well, this is a terrible place. Everything bad has happened. But we really always want to try and strive in Submerged games to have that element of, upbeatness and the ability to look at a place and go, I understand that this is destroyed, but look at what happened afterwards. It's a tricky balance. I agree.
I'm curious how you feel right at this moment. It has been a while for Submerged players. I think it did come to the Switch relatively. The original game came to the Switch relatively recently, if I'm right. And but for to come back into this world, how do you feel? And setting that up for players to rediscover.
I'm fairly excited. Like the fan mail that we do get, or I say fan mail, man, that dates me. We get messages, and we get Facebook messages and Twitter and stuff. The communications we get from our fans, I guess, are almost universally positive. And so I'm very excited to see how people engage with it now. It's nice to know that there are people out there excited to come back to that world. Because we left the first game is quasi-ambiguous in the ending, and I think people were really keen to see what happens with Miku and Taku going forward. So yeah, it's exciting. You're right. The gap is kind of weird because I think we were PC and that generation console all at the same time for Submerged in 2015, and then we came to the Switch later. We actually just released on the Switch in Japan like last year. Which is a strange one, but it had its own release in Japan, and it's doing okay there as well. And obviously we brought it to iOS, I think a few years later after it had come out too. So it's had this sort of stage release. So hopefully it's not too far away from any one of those players for them to remember, what was the world and what about it was interesting to them.
The last time we spoke to you was for City of Brass, and I'm just curious, what are some of the lessons that have been learnt in the interim about making games? I know you're a veteran of making games; you've been making them for a very long time, but I imagine every project there's things that you learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, wow. So City of Brass lessons, taking me back now. So that was an early access game. We went, hey, let's try early access. Everybody else seems to be doing that. It seems to be doing really well. And whilst I don't necessarily go, hey, early access is not a good thing, I don't think it was necessarily a good thing for us. I don't think we really fully understood how to run an early access game and how to try and build a community around your game. So, which specifically for like a roguelike is absolutely like really imperative. So I don't think we did a very good job there, and that's one of the lessons we learned. How not to over commit yourself to something. We poured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into City of Brass, including with the updates. Like we had free updates going for ages, and really we probably from a business sense should have done the numbers earlier and gone, it's probably not worthwhile. The problem was we were in love with the game and we really wanted to put those features in, and we just had to get those in there. So we probably worked on it for longer than we needed to. But hey, I'm still super proud of what we made there. I don't know, like specific things, like we were talking briefly about, like the Twitch integration was actually a super positive thing. But it turned out to be a feature that like people were in love with for a short period of time, like including the platform holders. It was the thing that they really wanted you to do. So it's like, okay, we'll do Twitch integration, or Mixer, if you recall. Before that disappeared, like there was a lot of interest around those, and so we put a lot of effort into those. And I think what we also learned from that was that we put probably the right amount of time and effort into those features, because it didn't cost us a huge amount of money and it had its payoff for the time while those features were really popular. And then when that fell away, like when Mixer just disappeared, it didn't cost us too badly. I don't know, that's all. There's a lot to come out of City of Brass. I'm going to keep barreling on. We learned a lot about first-person shooters again. Like coming back to first-person shooters at that point was, we had all of our experience from like Tribes and BIOSHOCK and all that, and so it had been a little while, but it was great to come back to that and relearn some of the basics of what people want out of a first-person shooter. And the procedural stuff that we did, like all of the levels in City of Brass are procedurally generated, so that in itself is quite a useful skill to have, and we're still going to apply, even if we don't necessarily procedurally generate levels. Like the workflow that were created to make those things was really, really helpful.
How much of that kind of factored into the development of Submerged? Like, were there broader lessons that you learned in terms of managing a project like this that made this a different way to do this game? Or were
yes.
they so different that it sort of doesn't really fully mesh up?
No, I would say so. Like it's not all easily scalable or easy to do a one-to-one. Like, hey, here's the thing that we did on City of Brass, and now we're going to do it on Submerged. But we did, generate a good understanding of like 3D spaces and how to dress them really nicely, how to make them look good, and that workflow of like when to take it from a level designer and then give it to a level artist and make it look better. We still made heaps of mistakes making this Submerged Hidden Depths, just as we do on every game. And we've learned a lot about like making an extraordinarily large city is quite a difficult task. When you're a larger team, it's still a lot of work. So yeah, like I don't know if there's any specifics that I can really point to. Just better workflow, I think. Better knowing our strengths and weaknesses too. Knowing where we should maybe get in some other people to help us.
We often like to ask people who've been making games, what their big advice is for others. We know we have a lot of listeners who are early in their stages of game development. What is some of the big advice that you would give to people if they're attempting to make a project of any scale that makes it a sustainable process that they can get to release and then hopefully on to the next thing?
All right. So first up,
you just solve game dev for us, Ed, please.
Yeah. We're still, like I say, we're still making mistakes and we're still learning. Obvious advice, which has been given to us and has been said by many other people, is like make the smallest version of what you want to do and prove it as quickly as you can. and get it in front of other. When I say prove it, get it in front of other people, get feedback on it. I think it's a tendency to want to protect your idea from the world and keep working on it until it's perfect. But if you can get the smallest version of it out there and get somebody to tell you that sucks early on, then maybe you haven't just wasted, 9 months of your life building this thing, which it turns out it sucks. Or at least you might love it, but everybody else hates it. Then you have to at least you got to make a decision then. Do I believe in this thing, or do I go, what, I respect these people's opinion and apparently what I've made sucks, so maybe I should try something else. So yeah, be open to that criticism and the feedback and be willing to change. There's that old lovely expression, which is, kill your babies, which just means you might love this thing, but it might just be a bad match for now. It might just be a bad idea. People have bad ideas all the time. So be prepared to accept that criticism. And if it's looking bad, chuck that idea. Do something else. You've got a million other ideas you can work on. That's the basics. I don't know. Trusting other people is definitely my core experience over my entire life as a game dev has been learning to trust other people and bring in those other opinions, and not just opinions, getting people to do things that you can't do. It's easy for me to say that, like when you're a small, tiny indie dev and it's just you, I understand, like you have to do everything. But I've now had the pleasure and the privilege of being able to work with more and more people and larger teams since we started Uppercut. And, it's always great to be able to, when you finally bring on somebody who is an expert at what they do and you realize how much a better a job that they do at this thing, like sound or music or anything, than you do. Like if you can find those people and work with them, do it. It's great. Because they will not just do the job that you've asked them, but they will bring ideas from their expertise, which you would never have thought of. There you go. There's my 2 big ones.
That's good. That's some good advice. What is one part of this game that you're really proud of?
Oh, man. I really like the story. I just like the way we tell the story, but I also like this particular story and the message that we've got in this game. But to be super lame and just focus on the visuals, I really like the sunsets. I like climbing to the top of a very tall building and waiting for the sun to set. And it's not just the sunset; it's the world, overall, the sound of the ocean and the wind blowing when you're up high, and the creatures and that everything. Like it's very zen for me to be able to just do that. So yeah, like that's what we set out to do, is make that real exploration game, and I think we've really done that.
So that's Submerged Hidden Depths. Thank you, Ed Orman, for joining us once again on the podcast. We can't wait to see what people think of it when they get their hands on it very, very soon. SIFTER is produced by Fiona Bartholomaeus, Nicholas Kennedy, Daniel Ang, Sarah Ireland, Kyle Pauletto, and Adam Christou. Mitch Lowe is our senior producer, and my name is Gianni Giovanni, and I'm the executive producer. You can find links to everything we talked about on this episode on our website, which is sifter.com.au. Read more about the games and the guests that we've featured. And while you're online, why not check out the SIFTER community? If you've enjoyed this, share the creativity that you're working on, or see what other people are working on as well, because we've got a weekly Share Sunday event where people put their stuff throughout the week and it all gets collected for Sunday for you to check out. That's sifter.com.au/Discord. So please share the show. It's the number one free thing that you can do to help us out. Lots of independent media rely on word of mouth, and your recommendation means a lot to getting people who might love this show to get it in front of them. We've also got a brand new podcast that comes out every week now that wraps the news of the week. It's hosted by a news journalist, a news reporter, Kyle Pauletto, who's turning his attention to covering the biggest stories in video games for the week. It's called Walkthrough. It's available every Sunday with a wrap of everything that's happening, and you can find it in all your podcast players right now, or go to sifter.com.au/walkthrough. That's all we have for this episode of Lightmap. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, have fun.